Probably true. Oh, I got this in an email. Ben Shapiro debates student who argues parents should let kids explore their gender. That student emailed me and said, I think they were like, hey, check it out and also critique me. And then I said, maybe, Lamau, might just play Duke Nukem 3D all night. But then I ended up streaming, so here I am. I'm a master's student at University of Michigan. Think I did well, but there are some nasty comments or nasty comments about me, but you cover this video on stream, maybe offer some criticism. Also help me in the comments, haha. I do not think that I can help you in Young America's Foundation's YouTube comments, but I can go over the content of the video. That is within my power. Yeah, I don't think there's anything we can do to get Ben Shapiro's audience up in favor of letting parents let kids explore their gender. All right.
Hello, my name's Brad. I'm here representing a lot of the progressive students here at UMich. And I just have to, I wanted to know your stance on trans people as a whole, and then I'd like to maybe have a conversation, a short one about
Sure.
what you believe.
Well, first of all, thanks for coming in and asking a question nicely. That's great. I mean, sometimes we don't get that. I mean, my stance...
Remember that Ben Shapiro... I've said... Okay, so right off the bat, I've said this before. Unless you're media trained, I would never recommend you speak to somebody like Ben Shapiro in this environment, because the audience is already on his side and he has the microphone. Everything is sort of like pre-assembled to maximize the likelihood that the person on stage comes across like, well, that's the reason why Ben will engage with college students pretty much exclusively in this format, because it's almost impossible to screw up here. So yeah, there's that. Additionally, so much of this is about like constructing the audience to hear out like the debate itself, right? Like so much of it is about understanding the environment that you're in and maximizing how receptacle that it is to you. What Ben will do often is he'll prime the audience for his like really stupid fucking answers with this show of civility. Oh, it's so nice to have you here. It's such a pleasure. So rarely do you progressives actually, summon up the courage to speak to me, Ben Shapiro. But the civility is a front, of course. It's done for a reason. Let's see.
On trans people I'd like to characterize this differently. I think that there's a few different categories here, and everybody's lumping everybody together in one category. There are people who have long-standing gender dysphoria, right, or gender identity disorder, right? That's a real active disorder that does exist. Okay, that does not mean that.
In case anyone has seen or has not seen Abigail Thorne's recent video, Philosophy Tube, it's worth pointing out that gender dysphoria is, while recognized, not really a substantiated phenomena when it comes to the experiences of trans people. His audio seems like, yeah, he is quite loud. They've really bass boosted this video. Let me turn that down. It is a good video, yes. The recent one from Abigail. So worth pointing that out. The line between like the gender dysphoric trans and the hip, fresh trans because it's a fad, whatever the groups you think whatever lines you think there are, it's quite a bit blurrier than it's actually thought to.
That these people are members of the opposite sex. Okay, this is where I reject the argument that if you have gender dysphoria, you have an actual mental disorder under the DSM-5. This means that if you're a man who believes you're a woman, this makes you a woman. You're not a woman, you're a man who believes you're a woman. I have tremendous sympathy for that difficult body dysmorphic condition. That does not make you a member of the opposite sex, because only...
So again, despite this continuing for like 8 years now, Ben Shapiro continues to deliberately lie about the argument of the opposition, by saying that trans people believe that identity is what changes sex. Identity does not change sex. Hormones change sex, or at least alter it. Identity changes gender. Ben has heard this a million times. He refuses to acknowledge this in his arguments because acknowledging a difference between sex and gender, something that he has acknowledged in the past at various points when challenged, would make his arguments a lot harder to make.
Objective biological reality can make you a member of one sex or another sex. Then there are people who claim to be members of sexes that don't exist, who claim pronouns that don't exist.
Now, again, notice how he's saying sexes that don't exist. Is he suggesting that when people call themselves like dream gender, they're suggesting that there is a separate sexual characteristic associated with the state of liking the Minecraft YouTuber. Like, again, nobody says this. This is one of the reasons why, like, you'll see such baffling comments from conservatives when they attack trans people, because they've never actually heard real arguments trans people have. This is why on Twitter, you know, speaking of the site, you'll see people in the replies who are like, "You think that, wow, so you're a man, so where's your penis then?" or something, which reveals not only that they're low IQ, but also just that they're like they don't actually know what's being argued over, you know?
Who claim that they are gender fluid, which is not really a thing or has never really been characterized. There are folks who claim that without any evidence,
Gender fluidity goes back longer than Western civilization. It's never been characterized. What does that mean? Never been characterized? What does that even mean?
whatsoever that they have gender identity disorder, and that suddenly they discover at the age of 15 that they're gender questioning, but there's not really a persistent level of belief that has lasted for a persistent series of time, and people are being given testosterone or being given surgeries on the basis of this.
No. You know, judging from the incredibly low detransition and trans regret rates, we are not seeing a flood of 15-year-olds briefly expressing gender divergent behavior and then immediately having their genitalias put into a blender. It's not happening.
And then there are people who are intersex, which again is another category. And I think what happens in these conversations, people tend to conflate all these categories. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, trans people exist. And I'll say, okay, so what do you mean by that? And they'll say, well, you know, there are certain people who have Klinefelter syndrome. Okay, those are not trans people. Those are intersex people. That's a completely different category. Those are people who have an actual biological condition. They still happen to be a member of one sex, by the way. They're still sexed.
Yeah.
They just
Which sex, Ben? Because if you believe chromosomes are what determine the sex, then people with Klinefelter syndrome would not belong to the sex category that they are referred to by all of society. So
just happen to have secondary sexual characteristics of the other sex. Okay, so that's my general perspective.
Yeah, I think for sake of brevity, I think we'd be able to have a conversation about gender. And I really fail to understand how you claim that there's a lot of genders that are made up, and you know, this is. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? I think
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think that there's been a false distinction that's been made between sex and gender, and then gender has been read in as more important than sex. So basically, the idea.
So see, he does acknowledge that sex and gender are different. So even if he disagrees with the logic of sort of like modern trans activism, why does he insist on mischaracterizing them by saying that, oh, when you identify as this, the trans community says your sex has changed? I don't see any people in the trans community saying this. He knows that he's lying. That's the point. Like what the statements that he's making, he simultaneously will acknowledge that gender and sex are different and aren't, and that is because he has to lie for this to track.
Of gender was an idea, a concept that was brought up by a college professor named John Money back in the 1960s. And the basic idea is that gender was a set of cultural characteristics that we impose on people of a particular sex. So it's not that women have babies, it's that women are gendered as though they have babies, and this is what makes a woman a woman.
What? Wait, what? Okay. Sure. The concept of gender being distinct from sex is because we're talking about linguistic descriptions here. It doesn't have to have any historical precedent. So, like, again, this is like how different cultures will have different words for different colors, and the more words they have for different colors, the more likely they are to be able to identify the difference between those colors. Even if the English language has absolutely no linguistic history of a given color distinction, you could still identify that distinction in another language and go, ah, yes, that distinction is real. Our language might not have a term for it, but that culture's two separate terms for like these two shades of orange, even if we only have one word for that, orange, that distinction they recognize is a real thing. It's empirical. And likewise, the fact that sex and gender are different is empirical, insofar as we have any understanding of these terms, with sex being the biological and gender being the social. Strongly related, but nonetheless different. That's pretty simple to understand.
Okay, that's not correct. Women have babies. Or we'll say that gender is a series of characteristics that we it's a series of stereotypes, essentially. But then you'll see the trans community argue that if a boy has stereotypical attributes of this gender, this makes them a member of the opposite sex, which doesn't make sense. You can have a feminine.
What? This is what I mean about, like, it often not being worth it to debate people who are in his position, because he gets 20 times the time that you do, and he gets to just say objectively, like obvious, again, like, in any sensible community, like, the audience would be laughing at this here. You know what I mean? Like, yes, the trans community, believes your sex changes if you pick up a doll, you know, but it doesn't, you can't really call them on it.
Boys, you can have masculine girls. I mean, this has been a feature of life for all of human history.
The trans community, famous for not knowing about the existence of feminine boys and masculine girls, as if when you go on trans Twitter, they're not literally exclusively talking about muscle mommies and femboys. Like, that's literally, like, yeah, yes, you know, you go to trans Twitter, and what are they talking about? You know, gender heteronormativity, right there. They're talking about gender congruence. They love, you know, highly hegemonic expressions of gender stereotypes. They love that shit, yeah.
It doesn't make them a member of the opposite sex. So when people say gender, what I want them to do is define what they mean by gender. If they just mean a set of culturally attributable attributes, and they say that that's completely separate from sex, first of all, I reject that. I think there is a strong correlation between gendered behavior and sex.
See, right, literally, right here. He's like, I will concede this point that refutes my previous statements. Because he's right here saying that gender and sex are distinct things, attributable attributes, that are related. He's saying it right here. So then why does he keep saying trans people are saying that the sex is what changes when you identify as this or that? If he himself is capable of recognizing these separate categories, why does he have to misrepresent the opponent? The reason I'm phrasing it like this is because I want to make it clear. It's not just that he's wrong. Of course he is. And it's not just that he's being dishonest. Of course he is, you know? It's that he is so dishonest that his own statements refute themselves. Any person who is intelligent and objective should be able to watch this and internally recognize, oh, he's full of shit. Without any outside info, without any correction, without anything else. Because he's supplying you the information that tells you that he's being dishonest elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean that's how we socialize children. I mean, I think it's a pretty the connection's there, and I don't think it goes.
It's not all socialization is the argument that I would make, and that's backed by the fact that in the primate kingdom, for example, there are heavily gendered areas of behavior. The notion that basically boys and girls when they're born are androgynous widgets, and then we make a boy by giving him a truck, and make a girl by giving her a doll. That's not true on any sociological level.
Which is why it's great that the student never said that that was the case. He never said, again, this is a straw man. Again, the student never said all of this is attributable to socialization. At no point has the student said, biological sex plays absolutely no marker on people's behavior. But Ben will pretend that he has said that because now he gets to refute another straw man. He's made like every statement that he makes, you know? Yes, and of course Ben's goal is to make the student defend that position. But I think that my man over here is going to avoid that trap and continue asking questions.
Again, I find it really...
Look at that! This is applause for Ben stating something that is completely unambiguously unobjectionable that doesn't contradict anything the student has said. Like, Ben might as well have responded with, oh, well, despite what you might claim, the sky is blue. Folds his arms and the audience claps. But that goes for them, you know? Because they think that he said that. This audience now believes the student said that sex has no influence on the behavior of a young human. This audience they believe that now. They do.
So we just clapped for Ben comparing primates to humans. I want to establish that. And then on top of...
I don't think that's a good follow-up on the student's part here. The problem isn't the comparison, because I think you can make fair sex gender analogies with regards to the, the like primates and humans or whatever else. We do use animal examples. The real point here, I think the best thing you could have said was, I never, at no point did I claim sex didn't have an influence, you know? Like you could, what you could do is take possession of the applause. Well, the audience is clapping for both of us here, Ben, because I don't disagree with you. Of course, sex has an influence on behavior, but as we agree, it's not 100%, which Ben admitted in his statement there, that it's primarily sex-based. You know, in that way, you can sort of assume the power of the applause.
That.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the attribute of mammalian biology. So yes, in fact, I will argue. I'll compare human beings to literally any member of the mammalian species when we are talking about sexual dichotomy, which is the basis of all reproduction in mammalian species. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I do want to bring it back to the concept of socialization in children. I've worked a long time in public schools. I've noticed that students, this gender line that we're speaking of, the
really good poise on my man over here in terms of like presentation or like handling, cadence, I think would be the good term. Well, how do you, holding frame would be it. Yeah. Good holding frame. Yeah.
Binary that you were referring to. I think many of us fall within those two lines, man and woman. I'm not saying it's you either have one piece of genitalia or the other. I'm saying like we have masculine and feminine traits throughout that we pick up from our family, the world around us.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm feeling, if you agree with that.
But that's not what makes you a man or a woman. If a boy likes dolls, that doesn't make him a girl. Okay. And if a girl likes trucks, that doesn't make her a boy. And I feel that we're doing grave damage to kids.
They're going to start applauding again. Oh my God, Ben's doing it again. He's saying something that doesn't even disagree with what the student is saying, and the audience is going to interrupt them both for 20 seconds with applause.
By arguing the opposite.
I think we should allow them the space to explore that. If they
by the way,
yeah.
I don't, first of all, I do think that it is very important to provide rules.
I'm telling you, there is a reason why people like Ben Shapiro primarily interact with the opposition in this format. There is a fucking reason.
And rules for kids. I think the idea that kids are to be sort of left out there in the wild and then they do whatever they do. We don't treat them like that with nutrition. We don't treat them like that with education. We don't treat them like that with a lot of things. And the idea of teaching boys to actually embrace their boyhood, I think is quite a good thing. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, and there are kids who are, as I say, boys who will be more effeminate, and they shouldn't be bullied for that or mistreated for that.
Yeah,
but to suggest that this makes them trans or makes them a member of the opposite sex is the thing I'm really arguing against, because that ends...
Which, again, the student hasn't said. The student has not made the case that a boy being more feminine makes them trans. See, what Ben is doing here is, this isn't actually a discussion. Ben is using every statement made by the student as an opportunity to turn it into an excuse to strawman the opposition and give his own spiel in response to the strawman. There has not been a single time that Ben has directly responded to a point made. Every single time, Vaush, you should go to a college campus to debate Ben. No, you don't understand what I'm saying. Nobody could do well in this environment. That's what it doesn't matter. Do you think that if I was here, I would be able to overpower the audience or the applause? Do you think I'd be able to rest the microphone and hold it to my own face and keep it there while I could talk over him? The answer is no. And if you really get loud, they just cut your mic and tell you you're being uncivil. Okay, well, I appreciate your faith in me.
In a lie that leads to suicidal ideation, it leads to tremendous confusion, it leads to tremendous psychic pain.
Psychic pain. Obviously, nothing that Ben is saying here is backed empirically. The opposite is backed empirically. The suicidality is most common, overwhelmingly common, in trans people, especially young trans people, whose parents are not supportive of their identity. Whereas we have no evidence whatsoever of like suicidality being imposed on young people by woke parents thinking that their sons or daughters because they had a bow in their hair once. This is a made-up problem.
You're telling a lie to a kid, and lying to kids is not something I'm very much in favor of.
Applause? Is that going to get the applause too?
Yeah, and I think speaking on suicidal ideation, I think maybe denying the fact that like it's okay for a young person to decide if they fall within a certain gender line. I fail to understand how that affects you personally.
Okay, constructive criticism. Obviously, what you're saying here is objectively correct. However, in my opinion, I think the only way to really do well in this format is to point out that Ben is not like directly responding to anything you're saying. That every statement you've made, he'll then say, oh, okay, sure, sure. But what I disagree with is absurd straw man here, and that's bad. And then the audience will applaud for it, you know? I think what you need to do, you need to establish like a defensible framework, you know, off the bat. So here's an example. Ben talked about there are exceptions to every rule. Ben said that there are, Chad had a hiccup there. Ben said, you know, we should teach boys to be masculine, but there are exceptions to every rule. Ask him, what exceptions? What do you do if you have a like a teenage child who insists that they're trans? The doctors, you know, have been speaking with them, therapists for years, you know, they're consistent in that belief. Given the fact that all of the data, medical and psychiatric, suggests that you are causing them harm by denying them that, multiplying the rate of suicidality. Like, if you could find a way to shorten that, you know, like the you have to give them something to really answer to, because then if Ben doesn't directly respond to that, you can follow up with, so it sounds to me like you're, like, with no evidence, you're just letting, like, your political bias inform something that'll cause children to kill themselves, which is true. That is a factual statement that you would be making there. And the goal would just be, give them something to really answer to, you know?
And how
Anytime,
that hurts the child.
Right. So anytime society sets a rule, it affects me personally. You're not asking me how a kid in Saskatchewan identifying affects me personally. You're asking me to go along with the lie that that kid's personal subjective sense of identity shapes the definition of sex, and that I refuse to go along with.
There he goes. He's doing the sex thing again. This is the like classic Ben Shapiro argument where he's like, you can believe what you want, but I refuse to let your delusion shape my definition of sex. Again, he's been doing this for nearly a decade. He knows that he's lying when he says this. He's been confronted on this many times. He has had direct discussions with other people who have corrected him on this exact point. In his conversation with Blair White, they talked about this. Ben even acknowledged that he would use like female pronouns to refer to Blair White and has in the past. He knows that he's lying. There's just very little that you can do here to unmask that because, you know, people who like Ben Shapiro are kind of retarded.
Because as you say, kids are in fact malleable. And the notion that we're supposed to teach all 5-year-old kids that you can be a member of the opposite sex is deeply disturbing, chaotic, and wrong.
Again, and that's not what I'm prescribing. I'd like to be clear that what I'm saying is they should be allowed to explore whatever portion of
I mean,
male
if by
and
allow
female
you,
traits.
it depends. If by allow you mean, do I think the kids should be like locked in the Matilda chokey for playing with a doll or something?
Yeah,
no, obviously not. That's
the case
child abuse.
often. Yeah, in very orthodox spaces. Let's be honest.
Child abuse is illegal, and it should be illegal. Okay, but the notion.
But Ben Shapiro doesn't think it's child abuse to deny the gender identity of a trans child when courts have ruled the opposite. So, like, courts have literally ruled that, like, yeah, a person is unfit taking in a kid after a divorce because they refuse to accept their gender identity. It's you know, it's not. So, so obviously, I refuse to accept Ben Shapiro's delusional definition of abuse that, you know, you can't change reality.
But the notion that if my kid expresses gender confusion, that I'm not allowed to.
Again, this term gender confusion, it's not a real term. It's not used medically. Doesn't exist. Doesn't actually mean anything. You might notice the non-specificity here as well. Gender confusion like what exactly?
Say to my kid, my son comes home and he says one day, you're a girl. And I say, he says, I'm a girl. And I say to him, you're not a girl. That's biologically untrue.
I will say this, though. If any of Ben Shapiro's children do turn out to be trans, it's going to be incredibly funny for them to have that discussion with him. Because, like, they're going to have to do the 101 shit, and he's going to have to do the, like, high-pitched, nasally, my reality, my facts, your feelings bullshit. You know what I mean? You're biologically. Well, I'm sorry. Have you? What is your hip? What is it called? V ratio? I don't know. What is just some stupid ass conversation.
You're a boy. When you're a kid, you're confused in your feelings. The idea that that's a form of child abuse is a lie. That is not a form of child abuse. That's actually how you parent.
Well, the courts have actually ruled otherwise. Really depends on the persistence of that behavior, though. Obviously, if I had a kid, they just walked up to me and said, I'm girl or whatever now. Yeah, I don't know if I would take that as you know, a single total acknowledgement that they're actually transgender. They keep doing that for years, though. I don't know. That seems like a fairly committed perspective on their part then.
Yeah, and again, I'm allowing you that space, but on the other hand, you're opposing the very opposite. You're saying that it's sick and twisted for parents to allow their kids to explore different parts of themselves.
It is sick and twisted to present kids with the notion that boys and girls are not separate in humanity, and that boys and girls are not two separate and dichotomous forms of the species Homo sapiens.
Isn't it kind of self-evident how silly Ben Shapiro's position is when he phrases it like that? That it's sick and twisted to not teach your children that men and women are distinct biological category. That's like a very weird, esoteric thing to claim as sick and twisted. First of all, that's not what the student is claiming at all. Again, this is a straw man. But second of all, like, that's like, it's sick and twisted to not teach your children that righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. It's sick and twisted to not tell your children that flora and fauna represent two distinct to the animal kingdom. It's like a very weird, how much in your day-to-day life does the knowledge that men and women are distinct biological categories come up? Probably never, because it's not true. Because if you talk to actual biologists, they're like, actually, it's really complicated, and they'll point at a bunch of like helixes on a spreadsheet, you know. So so where is this like imperative coming from for Ben Shapiro? Well, the answer is from God. He is a religious man. This is called moral dumbfounding. What Ben Shapiro believes is that the distinction between men and women in the fashion that he understands it, which is biologically incorrect, but still work with it, is a like divine existential truth that has to be acknowledged. It like he thinks it's not just a category for him. It's not just like a thing that is true to him. Again, it's not true. But it's not just a thing that's true to him. It is a like root feature of the universe. What's interesting is one of the best ways to find historical allegories for this type of argumentation is to look at race science. Because, see, throughout the history of Western scientific racism, there's been an effort to justify racism with pseudoscience, like phrenology, stuff like that. But if you talk to racists throughout the past 400 years, you might notice that the scientific justifications are more of a like second order cope. The real thing they believe is exactly what Ben believes, that there is a divine existential categorical difference that needs to be respected. Take a look at the history of racism in the antebellum period before the Civil War. If you take a look at like the way that plantation owners, Southerners, just anyone who would write on racism back then, they were insistent in a like natural existential division between the white and black races. And what's more, they thought it was morally repugnant that people not respect that difference. Now, anyway, that is where Ben Shapiro is getting this energy from. It's the exact same kind of reasoning that you'd see in historical texts where, racists will insist that not only are the races different, but this is like a divine order kind of deal, and it needs to be respected or the universe will fall apart. You know that was like the mainstream position from racists, right? They didn't just think that black and white people didn't get along or that black people were worse than white people. They thought the actual fabric of reality, I'm not kidding when I say this, the fabric of reality was predicated on racial separatism. They believed that, absolutely. And they defended it with all the, repugnant sort of moral conviction that Ben Shapiro is demonstrating here.
And that the idea that there is no biological reality to that whatsoever, so that a boy can be a girl and a girl can...
Literally nobody said that. This is like the 18th straw man. Nobody has said there's no biological reality to biological sex.
...be a boy. That is a form of child abuse. That is the same thing as me teaching my kid that my kid can be a horse.
They're going to clap again. Oh, attack helicopter. They're going to clap again.
My kid cannot be a horse. That is not real. And if I were to teach my kid and take seriously the argument that my kid could be a horse, I'd be doing them tremendous psychic damage.
Again with psychic damage, not psychological damage, but...
I'm sorry, I feel like we're kind of running out of time here, but yeah. I really appreciate that...
Could I just get one more thing?
Sure, well, go for it.
See, I feel like we're running out of time here because I spent 8 minutes of the last 8 minute 19 seconds strawmanning you and getting applause for misrepresenting your position. Do you see what I mean now about it not being worthwhile? There's not actually any way to talk to Ben here. It's not actually possible. The only thing that could make it possible would be if there was a mixed audience. Because if an audience would applaud when you're able, if the audience will applaud for you, you're capable of delivering zingers, which puts pressure on Ben and makes him more defensive. In a mixed audience, you have the ability to say something like, hey, I don't know why you've just strawmanned me like 8 times. I have literally never said there are no biological differences between the sex. You keep saying that, and you keep using the term sex when you've already acknowledged that gender is a separate thing. So, and if you can do that and then people start clapping for you, then you can get Ben to have to defensively respond to what you've said, you know?
Again, we're making comparisons to animals, and you're getting a chant for it. And again, it's
not a great response here. Animal comparisons aren't invalid when it comes to stuff like this. They're stupid because Ben is doing it, but it's not principally invalid.
my favorite thing.
Yes,
but
because...
but I appreciate your point in saying that, you would be willing to allow another family to let their child explore, certain genders.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't allow a child to explore the lie that they can be a member of the opposite sex.
Oh, there you go.
Sex. He must be really pent up. That's all he can think about. Here would be a pointed question that you could ask Ben. What if you had a child who was a boy, who didn't seem to strongly identify with being a boy, but really cared about being able to wear dresses to school? No biological reality is being subverted. You supposedly believe in like individualism. You have played catch with your son. They've been given the lessons on masculinity, but he still wants to do that. How would you handle that? Now, obviously, Ben would be like disgusted by this. He would rather kill his child than allow this. But it is a way of directly and pointedly asking like a question about gender incongruence in a way that he can't make about sex. Though, honestly, knowing Ben, he probably would say something like, well, I respect your question, but what I really take issue with is telling your child, and so if my child came up to me and they said, my dress makes me a biological female, then I would say, no, that's simply not possible. That would be like you saying you're a horse. And then the audience would clap. Or would clap. Yeah, he might just do that. Yeah. That might actually be what there might literally just be no way around this. I'm sorry.
But if they become, I disagree with the basic idea of quote unquote genders entirely. Because if you're going to degrade everything down to the behavior of human beings, then we all have our own genders. Literally every single human, we could just have names. We can get rid of the idea of gender entirely, and I can just call you Bob, right? I mean, like we can all have our own. That's the easiest way to do this. We treat.
This is true. That's true. We do regard individuals with distinct social categories because we know them. That's okay. Yep.
Each other as individuals with a bevy of different attributes, rather than saying my gender is pansexual, fluid, 45, XYZ, right?
So
like that's
He did it again. See, he did everything. He did it again. He can't not do it. Audience is gonna laugh and clap.
So dishonest.
How is that dishonest?
Oh, they didn't.
You're making this straw man about pansexual gender.
No, I mean name a
gender. It isn't, and you know it is.
So you do it. You name a gender that you think exists outside of male and female.
No, I
see. So this is the trouble in this environment. So is Ben strawmanning? Yes, constantly. So how do you deal with that? Well, it's really difficult because what he's done again is strawman you. This is again a strawman right here. He's done it again. Because he's essentially said, oh, so I'm strawmanning you, huh? Okay, name 20 genders, He's done it again. It's very, very difficult to get around this, which is why you have to play into the civility game as well. Remember, Ben Shapiro does the civility game in order to provide contrast with this behavior. What Ben is waiting for is for you to speak up just a little bit or to push back a little bit so he can go, okay, no more Mr. Nice Guy, and he can start more aggressively strawmanning or attacking you.
I agree that people can lie within the bounds.
They're clapping over that.
Okay, well, again, I really appreciate the time of the back and forth. I think it is productive, and I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, no, and again, I don't believe any of you have malice views. I think a lot of your views are founded in the reality of the world, but I hope that you at least would allow yourselves to come out to some of the more progressive groups and maybe have these conversations.
By the way, having conversations like this, I encourage everybody who's conservative to have these kind of conversations to go into this.
That was my intent in coming here. And seeing how hard you guys were on the protesters out there who were using their First Amendment right was really tough to watch, especially for Americans who claim that the First Amendment is something that you co-sign. I'm sorry, but I have to say it.
I wasn't out there, so if anybody was mistreated as a protester, then I apologize on behalf of.
I don't know any of the details. Sorry. Yeah. So this is like the civility jerk off back and forth, right? It's like, you know, well, at least we all respect the you know, the magic of free and civil discourse or whatever else. So I was asked to do constructive criticism. My friend, your problem is the game. Listen, okay, the game was rigged from the start. That's the problem. I really mean that. I genuinely. This isn't me like trying to do a cope thing or like, oh, I don't want to criticize you really. This isn't an environment. You know what I mean? It's like seeing how well a person can swim and toss them into lava. Like, you're not going to learn anything. For what it's worth, though, you held poise very well. And I think that's honestly the only thing you can really do here. In your position with me, I don't know how much better I really could have done. Because it's lava, right? I can swim, but it's lava, you know? The best you can do is not freak out. Actually, you know what? In an environment like this, there is one goal, and that is to not provide a clip that right-wing media can circulate for 5 years of libs being owned. That's the number one goal. Don't give them anything that'll give them a good soundbite to work with until the end of time. And you didn't. Not only did you not, you didn't even come close to it. And that was great. Really, that's good. Yeah. So to that extent, you have nothing to apologize for, and you have something to be proud of. That's my review.